not all dogs are the same and not all people are the same. You see, we can think that each dog is an individual. It's true, but yet dogs also fall in categories. For example, this is a border collie, and analyzing the different types of dogs and their genetic lines, I can more or less determine the character of this border collie, and I can predict his offspring if I make it to breed with another border collie. Now, for people, it's exactly the same. We usually don't like to discriminate, but I'm here to tell you that actually God discriminates, and we should do it too. What do I mean by that? Today, the word discrimination got a negative connotation because it is related to the idea of presenting a stereotype. It is not really the same. A stereotype usually, in a common language, is related to the idea of something that people think is true, but actually is not true in all cases, or even in most cases, sometimes people would say. Now, if we analyze better that, if a stereotype is born, it's because people understand that in most cases it is true. So the idea that believing in the stereotype is not real, it's vanity, it's not true. A stereotype is born based on reality. Otherwise it would not be born. As well as a joke is fun because it contains truth, a large amount of truth, which is usually subconscious and is between the lines. Otherwise the joke would not make people to laugh. So the same is with discrimination. You see, discrimination is very essential for humanity. We have to discriminate between good and evil. We have to learn to discriminate between social structures as well. Every person that needs to hire somebody else has to discriminate. Discriminate about the condition of his education, the condition of his moral values, will he be a trustable person or not, the condition between his experiences, and so on and so on. Now, many people think that God is a person that has been dealing differently in the past with humanity. When I mean person in the sense of a personality, an identity, that has been dealing differently with humanity in the past, especially in the Old Testament, and in the New Testament, suddenly everything changes. And his true nature, his real nature is revealed, because before he couldn't really reveal it, and he was masking it as the tough guy using a pedagogical way to teach people, but not really revealing his super graceful and sweet character. This is not true. In the Old Testament you can see plenty of occasions where grace is revealed, as well as in the New Testament, especially in the book of Revelation, you can see situations where law is administered and righteousness. And both elements are present in the New and in the Old Testament. Now, God does not change. So don't come up with the idea that God behaved in one way in the Old Testament and God behaved a different way in the New Testament. It is true, as our parents, for example, relate with us, changes when we are children, but that doesn't mean that when we become adults and we interact with them on a different level, that they are not the same parents that treated us harshly when we were children. By harshly, I mean in a pedagogical sense, in an educational way, by punishing us. So it is the same parents as well as it is the same God. And we have to be really aware of that, because a true adult, a good adult, is able to refrain his let's say, more aggressive part or more law-oriented part. He's able to refrain it willfully, and that's what makes an adult different from a child, which is not able to refrain it willfully. But it's still the same adult. It's still the same child. It's still the same person. Nothing really changes. It changes his ability to refrain, in this sense, our human nature. Now, God is also nature, is a divine nature. But don't think that the human nature is negative because wants righteousness in their own terms, and God's righteousness, therefore, it is just a projection of human nature. No. God has his sense of righteousness, and God demands righteousness as the law demands. That's why Jesus needed to die, because the law demanded shedding of blood for sin. So sin needed to bring death. Without death, it is impossible to have a remission of sin. And in this sense, our human flesh has to die. But when it's replaced by the spiritual one, don't think the spiritual one is all butterflies and flowers. The spiritual one implies the law with the ability of refraining it in circumstances of grace, but it is the law that is the basic, not the grace. So the grace is the bonus, not the standard. The standard is the law. This is very important. So in a matter of discrimination among humans, usually we are very allergic to it because of the Second World War. We are allergic when people discriminate because of the skin, for example. But the fact that people discriminate because of skin, it is just a side effect of the cultural discrimination, which is not a negative thing. What do I mean by that? Cultures in themselves are the container of moral values. So our discrimination weight should be like the one of God, morally discriminating. The law of every nation discriminates morally. So when one does not abide by the moral requirements of that culture, which the law of that nation tries to build together, because cultures can be made and can be built. Cultures are not just something genetic. They are embedded genetically in people because moral value is embedded genetically, but we can form them. As well as the Western world, for example, formed a Judeo-Christian culture, which is mostly what we have been running for the last centuries in Europe, in Australia, and in the US and in Canada. Now, the rest of the world runs by different cultures, and each culture contains within themselves a set of values, and these moral values are what we should discriminate on. Now, if you are a spiritual person, for example, you do not fit exactly in the category of the culture of the nation you belong to. You would fit, for example, in the category of a Christian that lives in China. You are not really a worldly Chinese. You are not really a Chinese. You are a Christian that comes from a Chinese culture, lives within a Chinese culture, but you are a Christian. And a Christian is another culture. You can be Islamic and you can be living in a culture that is Islamic. So you can be also living in a nation that has a darker skin, but not necessarily be of the same culture that your belief is based on. Not all Arab countries have to be Islamic. Do you understand what I mean? Not all Arab genes have to be Islamic, as well as not all Western people have to be Christian. Now, the Western world is a culture, but Christianity is a culture within a culture, or rather, another culture. Now, as I said this, you would recognize that there is a hierarchical structure in society. People that are defending the case for social injustice, so social justice warriors, would say that hierarchical structures in the West are based on power, the power of the white against the rest. Not true. The hierarchical structure in society in the West, it is based upon value, Judeo-Christian values. If you do not comply to the Judeo-Christian values, which we think to be the best ones, you will be for sure discriminated because you are not complying with the culture. And this is why it is so confusionary. People don't understand the difference between culture, moral values, and power. So they think that everything is based on power. No, everything is based on moral values. It is true that the abuse of power, as for example in the case of Hitler against the Jews, has brought difficult situations in the world. That does not mean that power is wrong or that hierarchical structures are wrong. The abuse of something does not automatically delete the value of that something. So it is very important that we discriminate between what is right and what is wrong. That we discriminate people, as Martin Luther King said, by their character. I would add by the color of their character and not by the color of their skin. You see, I don't care what skin you are. I don't really care what culture you came from. I care what culture you are now. I care what set of moral values you have now. And if you do have some that are similar to mine in the core principles, and we can work together because we understand each other, then good. If our moral values are very distant from each other, I don't really care what color your skin is, I don't care what culture you come from, I care what culture you are. And if that culture does not comply with the culture of heaven, in this case, or what Christians would define heaven to be, I don't want to work with you. It is not a matter of discrimination that you would say is just because of the color of the skin. No, it is a matter of moral values. I would far better prefer to work with a dark color skinned person that has my same moral values than to work with a person that has exactly the same skin like me, but it has the values of the world. So please learn to discriminate and don't throw, as we say in Italy, the baby with the dirty water out of the window. Throwing out the fact that people would abuse power and privileges on the fact of fully removing the form of discrimination, making therefore a society based on relativism, where moral values are destroyed together with the removal of the possibility of discriminating. I really appeal on you for this because time is short and we have to learn to discriminate. May God bless you in this.